starving in minus 50 degrees should kill you in hours. Your body burns calories like gasoline. Your brain shuts down. Yet Soviet soldiers survived entire winters eating things that would make a nutritionist quit. What did they know that modern science is only now confirming? The Eastern Front was cold that turned spit into ice before it hit the ground. The German army planned for 6 weeks. Summer uniforms, light rations. The Soviets, they brought fat. While Germans ate crackers and canned meat, Soviets consumed something disgusting, salo, unrendered pig fat, white slabs eaten raw or warmed over fire. Sounds revolting, right? But here's what took Western science 80 years to figure out. Fat contains 9 calories per gram. Carbs and protein, only 4. When you're burning 6,000 calories a day, that math means survival. A 200-gram chunk packed 1,800 calories, more than 3 MREs, and it never froze solid. Germans thawed rock-hard bread with body heat. Soviets bit into fat that stayed chewable at minus 40 degrees. But salo was just the foundation. The real trick was what they drank with it, and it wasn't vodka. Here's what most people get wrong about alcohol in extreme cold. Hollywood shows Russian soldiers drinking vodka to stay warm. Total myth. Absolute lie. Alcohol dilates your blood vessels, brings blood to your skin surface, makes you feel warm for about 15 minutes, then you're radiating body heat into freezing air like a broken furnace. Frontline Soviet soldiers knew this. Officers would shoot men for drinking on winter duty, not punishment, survival. So, what did they actually drink? Kipyatak, boiling water, that's it. No tea, no coffee, just aggressively hot water consumed constantly throughout the day. A Soviet infantryman could drink 3 to 4 liters of near-boiling water during a winter march. Why? Because your body doesn't have to waste calories heating cold liquid up to body temperature. Every sip of freezing water costs you energy. Every sip of hot water is free thermal input. Think about it. If you drink a liter of ice-cold water, your body burns roughly 37 calories just warming it to 98.6 degrees. Doesn't sound like much until you realize Soviet soldiers were drinking 4 liters a day. That's 150 calories lost just from cold beverages. In starvation conditions, those 150 calories might be what keeps your fingers from going black with frostbite. Modern Antarctic researchers confirmed this decades later. Hot liquid consumption, even plain water, say significantly reduces caloric expenditure in extreme cold. Soviet logistics officers figured this out through trial and error in 1941. Western science published the first studies in the 1990s. But water alone won't keep you alive when you're marching 30 kilometers through snow. That's where the second food item comes in. And it's even weirder than pig fat. Sunflower seeds. Roasted, salted, consumed by the handful throughout the day. Soviet soldiers went through these things like chain smokers, go through cigarettes. Every pocket had a pouch. Every rest break involved cracking seeds. And here's why it mattered. Sunflower seeds are roughly 50% fat by weight. But unlike salo, they also contain vitamin E, selenium, and magnesium, nutrients that prevent scurvy, maintain muscle function, and keep your immune system from completely collapsing. And German soldiers were losing teeth to scurvy by January 1942. Soviet troops? Still chewing seeds in March. The psychological component mattered too. Cracking seeds gave soldiers something to do with their hands during long frozen waits. It was meditative, repetitive. Small victories of Hull against Colonel that kept minds occupied when sitting still meant thinking about how cold you were. But here's the genius part. Seeds are calorie-dense and lightweight. A kilogram of sunflower seeds contains about 5,800 calories and weighs almost nothing compared to canned goods or bread. For an army moving on foot through snow, weight-to-calorie ratio was literally life or death. One Soviet veteran described it like this: "Salo kept you alive. Seeds kept you human." Pretty accurate when you think about it. But neither fat nor seeds meant anything if you couldn't keep your core temperature stable during sleep. That's where the third food hack became absolutely critical. Soviet soldiers didn't just eat before sleep. They ate specific things at specific times, almost like programming a furnace. About 30 to 45 minutes before trying to sleep in a frozen dugout, experienced troops would consume a mixture that sounds absolutely insane. Salo, obviously, but also concentrated sugar from whatever source they could find. Jam, honey, literal sugar cubes stolen from officer rations. Here's why this combination worked. The fat provided slow-burning, sustained heat for 4 to 6 hours. The sugar spiked blood glucose immediately, giving the body fast energy to generate warmth right when you needed it most. those first brutal hours of trying to fall asleep when temperatures dropped hardest. This wasn't official Soviet doctrine. This was frontline knowledge passed soldier to soldier. The guys who survived their first winter taught the replacements. Eat sweet and fat together before sleep, or you won't wake up. Not a suggestion, a survival rule. Modern sports science calls this nutrient timing. Elite endurance athletes do the same thing now, combining simple sugars with healthy fats for sustained energy release. Soviet infantrymen were doing it in 1941 with pig fat and stolen jam because the alternative was freezing to death in a hole. But timing your calories only works if you actually have calories to time. And that's where things got dark. Because when rations ran out, the Soviet soldiers ate things that would make modern people physically ill. Birch bark, not as a desperate last resort, as a regular supplemental food. Soviet soldiers would strip inner bark from birch trees, scrape away the outer layer, and either chew it raw or boil it into a paste. Sounds like eating wood, right? Because it basically is. But here's the thing. Inner birch bark contains betulin, a compound with mild caloric value and anti-inflammatory properties. It also has enough fiber to keep your digestive system functional, which matters when you're eating nothing but fat and seeds. German soldiers who tried this usually got sick. Soviet troops from rural areas grew up eating it during famines. Their grandmothers taught them which trees were safe. Then there's the nightmare fuel, frozen horse meat. When horses died, and from cold or artillery or exhaustion, Soviet units would butcher them immediately. The meat would freeze solid within an hour. Soldiers carried chunks of it in their packs, hacking off pieces with bayonets when they needed protein. One veteran described it like this: you'd cut a piece, hold it in your mouth until it thawed enough to chew, tasted like iron and sadness. But it was protein, and in minus 50 degrees, protein meant maintaining muscle mass. Maintaining muscle mass meant staying mobile. Staying mobile meant staying alive. The Germans, with their superior logistics and canned rations, started losing soldiers to malnutrition by December 1941. Soviet troops, eating pig fat and tree bark, were still combat effective in February. The difference wasn't morale or ideology. It was calories per gram, and knowing which parts of a birch tree won't kill you. But all the food tricks in the world mean nothing if you can't defend the supply lines that bring those rations. And that's where Soviet winter logistics became genuinely insane. Here's what most people don't realize about Eastern Front supply chains. There were no roads. Snow buried everything 2 meters deep. Trucks couldn't move. Trains couldn't reach forward positions. So how did salo and seeds get to soldiers 40 kilometers behind enemy lines? Sleds, thousands of them, pulled by soldiers, by horses, by reindeer in the far north. Soviet logistics officers calculated that a 4-man team could move 200 kilograms of supplies 15 kilometers per day through deep snow. That's barely crawling. But it was faster than anything with wheels. And here's the dark genius of it. The sleds themselves were designed to be broken down and burned for heat if the situation got desperate. The ropes could be eaten if boiled long enough. Every piece of equipment had a secondary survival function. Nothing was single purpose. Some units kept emergency rations sealed in wax inside their sleds. Orders were simple. Don't touch unless you're surrounded and cut off. Those rations? Pure fat and sugar. A 500-gram block could keep one soldier alive for 3 days if he was willing to stay still and not move much. Basically, hibernate like a bear until relief arrived or you died. Coin flip. Contrast this with German supply doctrine. They relied on motorized transport that stopped working below minus 20 degrees. Their food came in metal tins that required tools to open, tools that soldiers lost or broke. Meanwhile, Soviet troops were biting directly into blocks of pig fat, wrapped in cloth. No tools needed, no preparation required. The death toll tells the story. German Army Group Center lost more soldiers to cold and starvation in the winter of 1941 to 42 than to Soviet bullets. Soviet losses were catastrophic too, but proportionally fewer died from exposure. They died fighting. Different kind of terrible. But even perfect logistics meant nothing without one final piece of knowledge. And this one sounds so simple that it's almost stupid. Soviet soldiers were taught to never eat snow, ever, under any circumstances. Seems obvious, right? Cold snow in your stomach burns calories to melt and heat. Except German soldiers did it constantly. They were thirsty, snow was everywhere, so they ate it, and they died faster. So Soviet field manuals were explicit. A mouthful of snow costs you 10 minutes of warmth. Soldiers were trained to melt snow in their mess tins over small fires, then drink it hot. Or hold chunks of snow in their armpits until it melted into canteens. Slow, annoying, but it worked. One Soviet officer kept logs. Soldiers who regularly ate snow had frostbite rates 40% higher than those who didn't. Same conditions, same rations, different hydration methods. The difference was measurable. The lesson was clear. Your body can't afford to waste heat-melting ice when it's already burning everything just to keep you conscious. The same principle applied to metal. German soldiers would instinctively touch metal weapons and equipment with bare hands. Quick way to lose skin. At minus 40 degrees, exposed metal becomes a flesh magnet. Your skin freezes to it instantly. Pulling away means leaving layers of yourself behind. Soviet troops wrapped everything in cloth, carried mittens with separate trigger finger sections, and were beaten during training if they touched bare metal in freezing drills. Brutal teaching method, kept fingers attached. Officers would walk through ranks during winter exercises, watching for that one recruit who'd forget and grab his rifle barrel barehanded. That recruit got hit. Hard. But he never forgot again. And he kept all 10 fingers through the winter. The Germans learned this lesson the expensive way. Field hospitals reported thousands of cases of contact frostbite in the first winter alone. Soldiers grabbing machine gun barrels, opening frozen truck doors, handling ammunition with exposed skin. Each mistake cost tissue, sometimes whole hands. Soviet losses from the same cause? A fraction. Not because they were superhuman, but because some sergeant broke a recruit's nose during training for touching metal. And that broken nose saved his hands 6 months later. So, what have we learned? Soviet soldiers survived minus 50 degrees, not because they were tougher or more ideological. They survived because their food was engineered for extreme cold before anyone called it engineering. Pure fat for maximum calories, hot water for thermal efficiency, sunflower seeds for micronutrients, birch bark when nothing else existed, and the knowledge that every choice from what you ate to how you drank was the difference between walking back to your lines or becoming a frozen statue in a snowbank. But here's what really separates survival knowledge from theory. The Soviets didn't discover these methods in a laboratory. They learned them from dying. Every technique, every food choice, every timing strategy came from watching what worked and what left corpses. Trial and error when the error means you don't wake up. That's a harsh way to build a knowledge base, but it's effective. German High Command studied nutrition science. They calculated balanced rations with proper vitamin content and protein ratios. Everything looked perfect on paper. And then winter came, and those scientifically optimized rations turned into frozen bricks that soldiers couldn't eat without building fires that gave away their positions. Meanwhile, Soviet troops were consuming pig fat that never needed heating, drinking water so hot it burned their tongues, and cracking sunflower seeds that required nothing but teeth. Now, modern nutritionists look at the Soviet winter diet and see everything wrong. Too much fat, no vegetables, minimal variety, zero concern for long-term health markers. And yet it worked better than scientifically balanced German rations that assumed the war would be over before winter. Survival isn't about optimization. It's about understanding the specific problem you're solving. And the problem was simple. Don't freeze to death before you can shoot back. The Germans were solving for nutrition over 6 weeks. The Soviets were solving for not dying tonight. Different timelines, different solutions. One approach assumed controlled conditions and supply chain reliability. The other assumed everything would go wrong and you'd still need to function. Guess which one worked better when everything actually went wrong? 80 years later, we're confirming what Soviet quartermasters knew by watching men die and taking notes. High-fat diets for extreme cold. Nutrient timing for sustained energy. Hot liquids to preserve core temperature. We just gave it fancier names and published it in journals. They carved it into frozen survival and kept moving west.